Hi, this is Jen Rubin for The Contrarian. I'm delighted to have with me a esteemed economist, Jared Bernstein, who worked very closely in the Biden administration, helping to really create a remarkable recovery after COVID and a sustained period of growth and employment that really is somewhat unprecedented. So, Jared, I'm delighted to have you. Welcome to The Contrarian.
Thanks. It's great to be here with you, Jen.
We talked many times about the impact of government spending in the macro sense and in the micro sense. What happened the other day was that the administration turned off the spigot of grants and funds, whatever that means, and loans. Give us a sense of the magnitude of the impact on the economy. What types of dollars are we talking about? And what could that potentially mean in the economic sense for the health and continued growth of the economy?
Well, of course, government spending is a very explicit part of the GDP equation, which includes consumer spending and investment, and includes G, government. And the federal government spends about 5 trillion a year. I think that what we're talking about might maybe could get up as high as 1 trillion, so a fifth of government spending. You would definitely feel that in the overall economy. I have to say, and I think of myself as kind of a macroeconomist, that my first response on hearing this was actually much more on the people end, sort of how this impacts childcare, hospitals, police forces. We already know that state Medicaid providers are saying this really screwed them up, even though a judge implemented a stay at the last minute. So you're fooling around with, I think, potentially significant damages, both at the micro and the macro level.
The micro level is certainly astounding. Someone can lose their home if they need funds to pay the mortgage, they can lose medical care, they can lose child care, as you said. This reminds me somewhat of a forced shutdown of the economy that we had during COVID, when, for reasons of a pandemic, things had to close down. What is the effect of the government artificially turning off perhaps as much of $1 trillion in our economy on simply the health of the economy on the macro side of things?
Well, first of all, of course, in COVID, you had the whole damn economy shutting down. So basically, deep freeze for the private sector. And in fact, and I was there at the time, as you recall, we used to talk about this back then. That's a classic example of the public sector stepping into the lurch and picking up the slack. Now, this is a little different. So, yeah, again, I think if you artificially take significant dollars out of the economy, that's going to be a hit on growth. And in this case, it's very much concentrated by the nature of these loans and grants among the most economically vulnerable populations.
So, give us a sense of the sorts of people who would potentially face a disruption in their lives. What kinds of funds go
Yeah.
to the vulnerable people you're speaking about?
One thing that struck me was child care centers. There's a block grant that goes out quite regularly to help child care centers fund themselves. And the administration made this distinction without a difference, saying, "Well, we're not going to hurt individuals." Well, look, if the child care center doesn't get its resources, then trust me, the individuals who leave their kids there when they go to work will. So that struck me as really, kind of uniquely destructive, because those are folks who are going to work, getting help with childcare, which is one of our huge deficits in our economy. It's a big part of unfinished business in the Biden administration. We wanted to do much more in that part. Housing, you mentioned, is really important. People getting help to pay their mortgages and rent. I think hospitals, any nonprofits in particular. So those are some really, I think, sensitive pressure points.
And trace that out a little bit. If someone doesn't get a healthcare place to send their kids, that person may then have to stay home from work and miss work. Trace that out a little bit on kind of the downstream effect when you throw such a monkey wrench into people's lives.
Well, we know that one of the reasons why labor force participation is lower here than in Europe for caretakers, disproportionately women, of course, is because they just do a much better job of subsidizing childcare for folks who can't afford it. I think of childcare and housing, which are both areas exposed in this freeze, if it were to go through, as a similar in this regard, because these are basically market failures in our economy. The market simply doesn't produce enough affordable childcare and enough affordable housing. So following that through, in the case of childcare, you're going to have a diminished opportunity to work, then you can't earn, and therefore you're taking a double hit there. And of course, on the housing side, not only does that mean people are less able to access housing, but it means builders are less likely to build more supply.
This seems like an awfully strange way if we are concerned about housing prices, we're concerned about food prices, we're concerned about the cost of living, to suddenly throw this as we say, monkey wrench or bomb into the economy. We hope that this gets reversed. But if it were not to, if the courts were to say, fine, the president can do whatever the heck he wants, what would you expect the economic impact to be as we go forward? Would you be concerned about the continued growth and continued rise in employment that we saw under the Biden administration?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think that we would see some higher prices in some sectors. Obviously, if you're not getting subsidized and you have to pay out of pocket and you're not able to do that, we'd probably see some higher poverty rates. And again, if you really, I mean, it's kind of the opposite of a government stimulus. So a government
Right.
stimulus gets into the mix. I mean, I guess that was your original point. A government stimulus gets into the mix when the economy, when the private sector drops out, the public sector kicks up, and that helps support growth. This is the opposite of that. I think if you team that up with potential tariffs and deportations, what we're seeing is, a policy agenda that looks like it could juice inflation and hurt growth, while with a lot of collateral damage to economically vulnerable people along the way.
Well, you definitely point the way to other economic ticking time bombs. Contrary to what the president says, actually, consumers do pay for tariffs. We like to call them consumer taxes around here to make people aware of that. And the deportations, of course, strip agriculture builders of necessary labor
Yeah,
to create
those.
shortage.
I want to underscore the last thing you just said. So when we think of deportations, I think people tend to think of that, potentially very broadly, and you can come down on whatever side you come down. I know where I am, but it's very concentrated in particular sectors, as you just suggested. So, if you think about the folks who build homes, construction workers, if you think about many folks in the lower paid workforce and retail and dry cleaning and folk. Custodians, people who do a lot of that work, is that being concentrated in those sectors, you'd have a negative labor supply shock there, and therefore you'd probably see higher wages. And again, that's how you get worried about prices. By the way, the Federal Reserve is well aware of this stuff too, and it's one of the reasons why I think they might want to be a little bit hesitant on lowering interest rates, because they're worried about extra pressure on inflation rates from these kinds of activities.
And it's ironic because, of course, Donald Trump is all in favor of lowering those interest rates because he wants a go-go economy. Well, Jared, given the fact we're now in a topsy-turvy world where the federal government is no longer acting in a constructive manner, I'm sure, unfortunately, we'll have you back to explain more of this. But thanks so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.